Hello, everyone. This is Kale. I have with me today the associate editor at First Things Magazine, Justin Lee. Justin, welcome. How are you today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
No, it's exciting to have you. We're kind of meeting here for the first time. We've been longtime Twitter mutuals, and so it's fun to get you out here. Look, I two things sort of sparked me to reach out to you in the last couple of days. The first thing was a piece that you all ran a couple of weeks ago by a Twitter anon, Gasp, Lomez. And the second piece that really sort of said, man, I got to reach out to Justin and have a conversation with him was the one you put out just 2 or 3 days ago called Gatekeeping for the Barbarians. And so that's kind of the frame of this conversation. And so my audience knows where we're headed. But with the let's start with your piece on gatekeeping for the barbarians. Can you just give me a little bit and say what do you mean by gatekeeping and how are you using that? And why did you use the word for? I think that's an interesting question.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we all have a kind of a sense of what cultural gatekeeping is. You have legacy institutions that are, they have developed their brands, their reputations, public trust over time. They have their constituencies, and it used to be that a lot of legacy institutions were relatively healthy.
Yeah.
I mean, 70 years ago, Harvard University was Harvard University.
Yeah.
And now, you see this great meme that goes around of it's Jude Law and the young Pope, smoking it,
Yes, right.
in the regalia, smoking a cigarette.
Yeah.
And it just says, some people are impressed by the name Harvard. To me, it just represents decline.
Yeah.
And and you can just fill in the blank for just about any important institution in our culture.
Yeah.
And so gatekeeping used to serve this purpose of making sure that, those who are admitted, those who are affiliated, are of high quality. That they have this minimal high quality, that they have to, this threshold that has to be met, for whatever the domain of competence is.
Yeah. I like that you focus on that word competence, because I think that really is, if I'm going to sort of steel man the idea of gatekeeping, it's in order to ensure some kind of competence, some kind of, as you put, stability and continuity, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sorry, Mike's getting a little weird here.
It's quite all right. We'll make it work.
But yeah, so you have to safeguard competence in one way or another, and and that remains true today, even though we're kind of on shifting sands. And so old gatekeeping did that by and large through credentialism, and in conjunction with very very quiet forms of backdoor dealing and nepotism, the quiet networks, and not, and not just the old boys networks. I mean, it's been the old girls network as well for quite a while. But yeah, so gatekeeping now, that we've undergone, this profound ideological capture of all the institutions of cultural power, with the exception of just a very few, mostly connected to the church, that are not captured. Virtually everything else has been captured by whatever you want to call it, progressive radicalism, wokeism. It's, we all know what it is when we look at it.
Yep. And certainly when we hear it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think probably the most precise label for it is, it's a kind of therapeutic totalitarianism.
Yeah.
And so, in my piece, I refer to, the purveyors of therapeutic totalitarianism as the barbarians. And In some ways, they've penetrated the institutions, and in other ways, they are the result of rot from within.
Mm-hmm.
And so, once you have, uh, largely decadent institutions, you um, gatekeeping no longer serves this purpose of safeguarding competence,
Right.
because competence is no longer the measure, um, and the measure is instead identity of one form or another, identity and political utility.
Mm-hmm.
So you see this, like so for example, I can't remember which university was it that just hired Liz Cheney.
I don't remember the name of the university, but please go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, so like, what are you going to have Liz Cheney teach?
Yeah. Yeah.
How to forget about footage existing.
Yeah.
Like,
Oops.
yes, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I mean, it would make sense to offer professional degrees in such a thing at this point. But so I bring her up, that kind of an example, or Adam Kinzinger, going on to CNN.
That's right.
I think it's CNN. Where in terms of the identity rubric of these institutions, we're talking about white people, ostensibly conservatives.
Yeah.
They're the wrong people, they're the wrong identity, but they have an extreme political utility,
Mm-hmm.
as operating as a kind of controlled opposition.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they're given, these perches so that they can operate to some degree as gatekeepers over certain elements of the discourse.
For their respective tribes. Is that how you see that?
No, I think it's more of a broad
Okay.
and kind of, it's a little bit more nebulous.
Okay.
Because, they don't necessarily have direct institutional control,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but they do have the power for, a certain swath of the center to delegitimize contrarian opinion,
Right.
and
Right.
contrarian voices. And so that's all I mean by political utility. Sometimes trumps the concerns of identity.
Right. So with this sort of gatekeeping function, you invoke, instead of gatekeeping, ordering toward competence, it's ordered toward identity and loyalty and utility, as you lay out.
Uh-huh.
And I can't help but think, Justin, I don't know if you saw in the news just yesterday, the day before, a federal judge was invited by the Federal Society at Stanford Law School to give some sort of speech, to the faithful out there,
Hmm.
and it was disrupted, of course, by a DEI apparatchik. And
Yeah.
it's really quite a remarkable indictment of one of our nation's elite institutions,
Yeah.
and they were unable and unwilling to hear someone out, to hear a contrary opinion.
Yeah.
And
Was this shut down by the administration, or was it shut down by, by a,
well,
astroturfed
both,
student mob?
right? Yeah, both. There was a student mob, and then the students invited the DEI, administrator, and the DEI administrator came and sort of also blew it up in an interesting sort of way. The video's out there, and I can include it in
Mhm.
the notes that
Okay.
here below us. But the point for me is that you would think that elite, the elite institutions, which are charged with forming our elite to make them
Mhm.
competent, would care. But in your frame here, it would say that they're doing exactly, because they're the barbarians who sort of run the gates now, the gates,
Mhm.
if the walls, if you will, that they are in fact forming for precisely the kind of decadent gatekeeping that you suggest.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and it's become pretty much universal, at all of our you know, formerly prestigious institutions,
Hmm. Hmm.
and and increasingly, you know, institutions of lesser prestige, so long as they're kind of stepping stone institutions.
Right.
Um, and I mean, you tend to see gatekeeping anywhere, that has become, a kind of mecca for the surplus elites.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And so if an institution is able to employ a lot of surplus elites, there's going to be very, very rigorous gatekeeping um, by the new regime. But um, the question is, how does this apply to conservative institutions,
Yeah. Yeah.
which by and large are much less decadent? Um,
Is that a resource? Is that a resource issue or what?
well, no, I just, so there's a certain, the conservative worldview does safeguard against decadence.
Hmm.
And there is a concern for competence. There is a concern for real quality and continuity.
Yeah.
And so when you do have repetition, which is kind of the hallmark of decadence, the inability to produce new thought, when you do have too much repetition within conservative institutions, it tends to be of old standards,
Hmm. Hmm.
things that still do connect to the true, the good, and the beautiful,
Right.
and genuinely merit repetition.
Right. Right.
And, and so you have a kind of this intrinsic safeguarding against decadence that is commendable. Um, but at the same time, you have, even though we've undergone, I mean, you can call it a paradigm shift,
Hmm.
a regime change, uh, that has profound implications for every institution. Some people who, still have gatekeeping power, and in many cases, deservedly so, on the right. Um, the change, the sea change is invisible to them.
Interesting.
And so the obvious example regarding the Lomez piece is Patrick Deneen,
Yeah.
who you know has a lot of esteem. He has a lot of intellectual authority
Yeah.
and institutional authority, and deservedly so. He's brilliant.
Yeah.
Um,
I know for me, his book was a massive sort of turning point for me, and gave me a kind of frame with which to see what I had been kind of intuiting and feeling and being frustrated with. It was really a kind of one of those turning point books that's just been very helpful.
yeah,
So I just to throw it out there with you, like he's a substantial and significant figure.
yeah, yeah. He's one of my intellectual heroes.
Yeah.
I've given that book away to so many people.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I can never keep a copy. Like
Yeah,
there's not one in my library right now because I keep giving it away.
yeah. I got a handful of books like that.
Yeah,
A couple by David Bentley Hart are also
yeah, that's
on
good.
the list.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but the other thing that Deneen did that is, kind of really dear to my heart was a lecture he gave at First Things years back. The title was Aristopopulism,
mm, mm,
in which he lays out this vision for social order,
mm,
where power, where conservatives in power use power to decentralize, the federal government, to
yeah,
break up DC, for example,
yeah,
in order to, to give normal, non-Acela corridor Americans,
right,
a piece of influence.
yeah,
And, it's a necessary kind of step to rebuild felt citizen efficacy,
right, right.
which, when you lose that, that's when you get really ugly revolt,
That's right. That's right.
not just populism,
Hmm.
but potential actual violence.
Yeah.
And So and his vision here is that it's combining Aristotle and the idea of um, aristocracy, tweaking it and arguing that we should have an aristocracy of virtue.
Yeah, and of course,
Um,
right. And I think it's important, when perhaps when the audience hears aristocracy, we're not talking about a kind of, British landed elite in quite the
right.
same. We're talking about the rule of the excellent, right?
Yeah.
We need
Rule.
our best. We need our best.
Yeah. And so for Deneen, at least in this lecture, he makes the case that that kind of excellence is available to everyone.
Right.
It's
Right.
a very democratic vision
Yeah.
of
It's beautiful.
aristocracy.
Yeah, it's
It's
beautiful.
it's a an aristocracy of virtue is available to every citizen,
Right.
and I love that.
Yeah.
That's kind of a guiding light for how I think about what a healthy political order would be.
Hmm.
And it's something that I think very interestingly understands some of this problem of gatekeeping.
Right. So, okay, right. So so explain to the audience what happened with the piece that you all put out and then its
Mhm.
reaction, because I do think that this is important just to sort of
Yeah,
do a reset for our audience.
sure. Yeah, so we published a piece by a Twitter anon who goes by the handle Lomez, and Lomez is a flamethrower on Twitter.
Hmm.
Has been for quite a few years, but he's also incredibly intelligent.
Hmm.
And he Ross Douthat even referred to him as very smart in the New York Times
All right,
because of
Ross.
his foresight on COVID things.
Yeah.
Um, so he's kind of one of these crossover anons where
Yeah.
a lot of mainstream authorities follow him and pay attention to what he has to say.
Right. So you, in your piece, just again, to reinsert this here, in your piece, especially at the end, on gatekeeping for the barbarians, you talk about border discourse, right? That there's a sort
Mhm.
of like there's a border phenomenology. There's this conversation that is kind of allowed to happen on the fringes, away from the kind of normie center. Right.
Mhm.
And your point there, if correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's some vital things going on in those peripheries, so to speak, that
Yeah,
are actually quite vital for the center.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And at the very least, even if you're not excited about the ideas being produced,
Hmm.
there's a ferment,
Yeah.
or there's this incredible energy um, that is um, that is just kind of bubbling over right now, and you can let that energy get twisted and sent in dark directions, or you can help shepherd it,
Yeah.
it can, towards constructive ends. And but I do think that a lot of the ideas are very good,
Hmm.
and they're clearly very resonant.
Hmm.
And so one of these ideas is the Longhouse.
Yeah.
And so I asked Gomez to to write an essay explaining to the First Things audience, what the Longhouse is as a metaphor, and um, and kind of making a case for its its general accuracy,
Yeah.
um, and its usefulness as a metaphor, and as something to something to be against, as we look for ways to be for something else. Um, and it's by and large, it's just a way, it's just a name for all the things that we feel have gone wrong.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, I
you
read
know
it and it
yeah.
resonated with me right away, and I retweeted it right away, being like, "This
Mhm.
is important. You got to read this, and it's an interesting image, and it really captures some things." And so, so I liked it right away, and as I guess a border person, I don't have,
Mhm.
I know the darkness with which the border discourse can go, but I
Mhm.
felt very clearly that this was not in that kind of dark place, that this was actually one of the constructive places
Yeah.
that this kind of discourse could go.
Yeah. And, I think the term, I don't know if it originates with Bronze Age pervert, but it's,
Yeah.
certainly popularized by him in his book, Bronze Age Mindset.
Yeah.
And, and he, the way he uses it, kind of, I mean, it's always, with a wink.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, there's this, there's this merry pranksterish element to so much of this discourse.
Mhm.
And I think that's true, most especially when you get, startling, offensive references to race,
Yeah.
and so,
Yeah. Yeah.
so he's, made a few claims about the Longhouse in relation to race, that are like totally historically inaccurate.
Right.
I mean, my Viking forebears, you know, I,
Yeah.
they lived in long houses.
Yeah.
And so it's as an image of like the feminization of culture, it's both effective and can be really ineffective if you actually know a lot about anthropology and,
Right.
you know,
Right.
civilizational history. But, but that's the thing, it's in the hands of BAP, it's one thing, but it's totally, um, moved beyond his control, over the meaning of the meme.
Well, I would say it's a real meme, right? And
Yeah.
as we know, you can't control memes. You can only kind of surf them. It's
Yeah.
they're not. As soon as you try to pin it down, it sort of moves
Yeah.
off of the observation.
Yeah. And this is a good one, because it has resonance on both the right and the left.
Yeah.
Um, and particularly among young people.
Hmm.
So it's the kind of thing that, if you're forward looking and trying to engage the culture, and trying to help, highlight what you think is worth highlighting and position yourself to shepherd,
Yeah.
This emerging, disparate movement. It's the kind of thing that's worth engaging.
Yeah.
Which is why I commissioned it.
Right.
And, and I know Lomez. He is, he's as colorful as his Twitter page can be.
Hmm.
I know that he's operating in good faith, that he has a vision for what the just society,
Hmm.
the good society is. He wants to help bring it about. And particularly, he is doing really important things for dissident art and dissident literature. And he's going to, increasingly be an important figure for those reasons. And so it makes him, the perfect person to have from that world.
Yeah.
Write something for First Things.
Yeah.
And so, and I say that, even though I have disagreements with, elements of his argument, in the piece.
Yeah.
I mean, editors of First Things certainly don't agree with everything that we publish, but we do have a clear total editorial trajectory, that we're headed towards. And, and that remains unchanged. First Things is always going to be First Things.
Yeah.
But so to get back to the gatekeeping response.
Yeah.
You had Patrick Deneen, tweet out that, disappointment, doesn't express, how he feels about First Things publishing this piece, and which he hadn't read.
Very clearly, honestly, I don't want to be a jerk about this, but very clearly.
Yeah, no, he hadn't.
Yeah.
And but he recognized, the Bronze Age pervert term. And so he reacted against it and reacted against the anonymity of the author.
Mm-hmm.
And, but, and Twitter came crashing down on his head.
How so? If you could just sort of tell the audience, I mean, like, how do you see that? I saw the same thing, but I'm just curious as to your perspective on that.
Well, first off, if you lock your tweets relatively quickly, if you lock your, that particular tweet responses so that nobody can get in the responses and ratio you, that's, that you put yourself on thin ice.
Right.
And, but,
Well, what's fascinating, can I just interrupt you? Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
Justin. What's fascinating to me about this is that he did tweet this out, but
Mm-hmm.
Deneen is he's not a Twitter guy. I mean, so he's got a ton of followers, which makes sense. He's got like 39,000 followers, something like this. He's tweeted a grand total of 104 times in his entire life. Now, like I'm a loser. Like I'm on Twitter all the time. Like I probably have tweeted 20,000 times. I've got like 2,000 followers, that kind of thing. So like he doesn't tweet, yet he comes onto Twitter to put this out. He says, "Disappointed doesn't quite capture my response to first things, publishing a Nietzsche-light article by a Twitter anon. The justified opposition to wokeism increasingly dominating the mainstream right is in danger of descending into very dark places." So, that's quite something.
Yeah. Well, the, my favorite response to him was just from some random account with like no followers. And it's just this image of, it's like a sketched image of a longhouse and then a speech bubble descending down to encapsulate Deneen's tweet. So he is the voice of the Longhouse.
Yeah.
The Longhouse speaks.
Right. And so that gets into what you were talking about, that this kind of like, I don't know, in the piece you say something about, that's part of that gatekeeping portion of the sort of the, I don't know, the tamed opposition or something like that.
Yeah. And and I don't consider Deneen to be, controlled opposition by any stretch of the imagination. And I consider him to be, very much an ally.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is Lomez does too and loves his work.
Yeah.
But a lot of this has to do with, what First Things is as an institution and the kinds of worlds that it straddles. And, and the current moment that we're in. And how slow many people have been to understanding, this transformation in, how we engage information, and especially the political context in which that's done. So First Things, as the readers and the writers, there are a lot of academics. A lot of very, very great, very gifted academics. We have journalists that write for us. We have essayists, memoirists who write for us. We have one of our best writers right now is Paul Kingsnorth, who is a novelist, a fantastic novelist, and
so good.
And we have.
I think you got Mary. I think y'all published Mary Harrington a couple episodes ago, issues ago. She's fantastic too.
Yeah, she really is. And she's someone who I also think is informed, by dissident right discourse, and and that comes through pretty clearly. She's even written a piece herself that is essentially arguing against, arguing that, the Longhouse is a thing. And, and here's why this perverts culture. She doesn't call it the Longhouse, but, she a lot of mainstream people write on the feminization of culture,
Yeah.
and it's it's a worthy topic. It's a necessary topic.
So what
But
do you think? What do you think Lomez can do that a sort of a normie can't do? And is that worth the exploration?
yeah,
Or
yeah, I'll get to that in a minute.
yeah,
And
okay, sorry, yeah,
yeah, and it's fine if we go over time.
okay, okay, yeah, sorry.
Don't have anywhere to be.
I appreciate
Uh,
that, Sarah. I appreciate that,
yeah.
Sarah.
So so first things as an institution, it's a very, very special institution. It's a very special magazine to a lot of people. I mean, I knew that before beginning to work there because it was deeply, deeply precious to me, and
Mhm,
I mean, is deeply precious to
mhm,
me.
mhm.
And I've been reading them for a decade or so. If I'd known that they existed prior to that, I would have been reading them earlier.
Yeah, yeah,
I wish someone had given it to me when I was in college.
right,
I had no idea such things existed.
yeah.
Um, it shaped my intellectual formation more than just about anything else in my life. The past 15 years.
And just for our audience's sake, you come out of the evangelical tradition, is that
I
right,
do.
Joseph? Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, okay.
yeah. Parents are they evangelical campus ministers,
Yeah, gotcha, gotcha.
and yeah. So I grew up in that world. I grew up in InterVarsity Christian Fellowship
Yeah, of
world.
course. Yeah,
That's
yeah, of course. Yeah.
that was their organization for a long time.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, and when a few years ago, when I got my first piece into the magazine, it was just like, a beautiful earthquake in my life.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
I
one of the greatest affirmations ever.
yeah, yeah.
And so it's a very special place to a lot of people, and you see that, I could see that, at our intellectual retreats, talking to people, who, just readers, who find fellowship, in these pages.
Yeah.
And so you have, when it comes to the idea of safeguarding competence, you have this mixture of, of a few different constituencies. You have this academic constituency, which has a particular understanding of what competence is and how to safeguard it, through credentialism. And then you have the faithful constituency, or the spiritual, the believing constituency, which has a different but compatible understanding of competence and what safeguarding is, and what safeguarding looks like in a spiritual context. And in both cases, anonymity, is a violation of what they see as necessary for safeguarding. Um, Anonymity means that someone has eschewed credentialism.
Mhm, mhm.
And when it comes to the academic context.
Yeah, I'm not gonna play the game. I'm not only am I not gonna play the game, but I'm gonna play a whole
Yeah,
different circus. Yeah.
yeah, and of course, a lot of these, a lot of the really sharp anon accounts are, they're tenured professors, who are just have that, have this, they moonlight on Twitter,
Yeah, yeah,
and nobody knows.
yeah.
And but for the spiritual side, um, if if you have looked to a magazine for spiritual guidance, and you've seen a lot of authoritative figures published there, you have a certain sense of trust,
Yeah.
that you're in safe hands.
Yep.
And so when you see someone who, I don't know who this is, and I can't know who this
Yeah,
is,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
how do I trust this?
yeah, yeah.
So so people who have been frustrated about that in particular, I understand that. But of course, there's something about this that got people upset in a way that, say, publishing Michael Lind, who's, openly gay,
Yeah.
or any of the many openly gay writers that we've published.
Right.
Who and other people who live lives that very openly, flamboyantly flout what
Traditional mores or
yeah
something.
yeah traditional mores. I mean, we even published an interview with Michelle Welbeck. I mean, and so, but it doesn't occur to people to think, wait, should I be taking moral cues from Welbeck
Right.
just because
Right.
we publish it? No, but you normally make that distinction.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the criticism seems to forget that, that people are rational, that readers are rational, that they shouldn't be condescended to, that they're perfectly capable of understanding, okay, this is a different kind of essay. This is a different kind of rhetorical function within the magazine than when we publish, Cardinal Mueller, for example.
Right. Right. Or our piece from George Weigel, or anything like that. Right. Of course.
Yeah. And normal people who are well adjusted, they don't even give that a second thought. They just do that naturally. Mm-hmm. And but if you're incentivized to gatekeep for whatever reason, you're incentivized to forget that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
what do you fear we lose if we don't allow what you call in another spot, if we fail to become conversant in border pigeon?
Yeah,
I love that line. It's great. So
thanks.
Yeah, what's the fear?
Yeah. So my fear is that it's actually multifaceted.
Mm-hmm.
One fear is that we become irrelevant to young people who need what we're doing as a magazine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's yes, we are in a role as being intellectual and aesthetic shepherds,
yeah,
and spiritual shepherds in a particular way. And and so we can't have the standards set externally, and adopted because they exist in the world in a particular way. But we also can't be ignorant of their existence.
Mm-hmm.
We can't be ignorant of where people are at if we want to actually communicate with them.
Yeah.
And so so there's there's the concern of irrelevance, of becoming irrelevant because we're just trapped in our ivory tower. And the other fear is that I personally will miss something. That
Absolutely.
I'm not. I mean, I have a very high estimation of my intelligence, but I'm not omniscient. I'm not. I am not without bias. In fact, sometimes I imagine, like, if we had to wear glasses, spectacles that actually represented all the different lenses we were looking at the world through at any given moment, our faces would be so encumbered, it would be, it'd be hideous.
Mm-hmm.
And that's certainly true for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, having a lot of those lenses wiped away and looking at the same scene from, a radically different lens, might not be a good lens for anything else except for one aspect of reality.
Yeah.
But you might be missing that. And so that's, it's just what it is to actually, cultivate, I think the right kind of intellectual diversity. That is not diversity for diversity's sake, right. But diversity for the sake of seeing more truly.
Right. Because we what motivates me and a lot of the conversations that I'm trying to have is that I think many of us can sense that we are in a sense making crisis, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's all kinds of crazy things going on, and we are all of us struggling to make sense out of what we're experiencing and what we're seeing and what we're hearing, and if we artificially constrain our sources of information, any attempt on our part, if it's too curated, any attempts that we are making to make sense out of something and looking for relevance will fail because we're not even giving something vital an opportunity to sort of make its way into our heads as we try to put these things together.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, so there's that element. But there, the other element, the other fear is, I'll call it, for lack of a better term, kind of spiritual, psychological.
Mm, okay.
Because, we have lenses, when it comes to that as well. We do have our spiritual life has a particular phenomenology
Hmm.
that's shaped by particular forces,
Hmm.
which is why we need to be very discerning about the
Yeah.
forces we allow to shape it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And which is why, you shouldn't just log into the dark web and just,
Right. Right.
throw the windows open.
Yeah.
Um, you're, you're liable to get sold into white slavery if you do that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. No, right. There's an imprudence in that is potentially catastrophic.
yeah. And so, it helps to know that, okay, in this world where there's a lot of really rank discourse that takes place,
Hmm.
amidst all the very generative discourse, um, it helps to know, okay, well, here are a few names of people who are much more consistently generative.
Hmm.
I think Lomez is clearly one of those people. um, and but and so it helps to have a few footholds when you're navigating a new discourse tradition,
Yeah.
to be overly academic about it.
Hmm.
And but there is an element though here that, um where some of these guys, and I would include Bronze Age Pervert,
Yeah.
they see something very clearly that a lot of Christians fail to see about our culture, and particularly about what culture is doing to men,
Yeah.
and what this feminization of culture has done to men. And um, so you see this emergence of, yeah, I would call it kind of postmodern vitalism.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
which and so obviously there's all sorts of unhealthy aspects to this, if we're coming at it from a Christian
Right.
perspective.
Yeah. Naturally.
But it is responding to real pathologies
Hmm.
that have a deforming influence on the human spirit. And um, so simply observing that, okay, people are diagnosing problems correctly.
Hmm.
Um, you know, what are their answers, and what's the fruit of their answers?
Hmm.
Um, you'll see that, oh, there's actually some real positive fruit,
Yeah.
that's being experienced by a number of young men who, who all of a sudden have um, feel like they have a place to stand, amidst the storm.
Right.
They have an
Right.
orientation, and we can say it's not perfectly correct, and that's true. We need to tweak the orientation and point it higher. But it's still performing a very important function. And I would compare it to. I mean, it's part of the larger phenomenon that I think Jordan Peterson represents.
Yeah, I was that's I have three names sort of popped into my head, two of which I think are well known by our audience, and the third maybe not, but I'll card them out here. going backward, yes, definitely Jordan Peterson. I think that is a figure who has clearly galvanized a force, has galvanized an audience that clearly has not been served either through the sort of the new atheist, the remains of the new atheist crew who are still, lurking around on Reddit threads, but also a sizable chunk of Christian men who have been essentially neglected, depending upon their denomination and depending upon their congregations and all of that, right?
Mhm.
But one must simply contend with the fact that he formed an audience, and the audience is real, and the audience doesn't appear to really be going anywhere. In fact, they're coming back for more. The
Yeah.
other thing,
And most
you go ahead.
importantly, lives are being improved.
Yeah, right. I mean, proof is in the
And
pudding, right? I mean, and he even made a comment about that. I listened to one of his podcasts maybe a month or two ago, and he's like, "Man, when I did my first book tour, it was a lot of like people had just been kind of crawling out of the shadows and trying to
mhm,
put their life together." And he says, "Now at this second book tour, and sort of Beyond Order, whatever the second book is,
mhm.
people are coming in there, they're in their suits, and they're all like they're dressed up." And he says
Yeah.
it's the dynamic has been noticeably different, and I think that's exactly right. That there's been an actual moving of the needle, right, for
Yeah.
these men in particular. And he said that his audiences have become much more. There are more women coming to the shows as well with these men, right? So that's
Yeah.
an interesting dynamic that it continues to amaze me, Justin, the amount of ire that he is able to raise from what I would consider sort of gatekeepers in journalism,
Mhm.
primarily on the left, but a lot on the right. Gatekeepers in church circles, gatekeepers, and I mean, it really is amazing. Like he
Yeah.
just ticks people off, and I can't help but think that part of that's a little bit of jealousy,
Yeah.
but
Especially on the right.
yeah. Oh,
You know?
yeah. No. And any time a churchy person on the right brings up Jordan Peterson, they immediately have to explain to the audience why. Well, if Peterson had just read more Thomas Aquinas, we would, everything would be fine. And it's just laughable. Honestly, it's laughable and a little bit sad.
Yeah.
But the other sort of border personality from a generation earlier that was very consequential for me personally as a young religious conservative guy growing up and cutting his teeth was Camille Paglia.
Yep.
She comes out with Sexual Persona in 1990, and man, what an important corrective for me
Mhm.
personally, as she gives voice to sort of it's very tempting to turn Christianity into this very kind of rarefied idea, abstract, notional sort of thing. And she sort of reminds you, wait a second, there's a biological substrate that you have to take seriously. And so
Yeah.
for me, she was such a huge part of my development. But again, I note here that for all of these things we're talking about, it's Longhouse. It's
Yeah.
Longhouse discourse, right? It's like the inability to have genuine conversations about sex,
Mhm.
and men and women, because all of us are essentially scared to get canceled. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's the gist of it.
Yeah. So just as a quick aside
Yeah.
about Paglia, um, I don't have any proof of this, but my suspicion is that Bronze Age Pervert essentially lifted the idea of the
Oh,
longhouse
yeah,
out of
yeah.
sexual personae. So she's got this often repeated quote: "If civilization had been left in female hands, we would still be living in grass huts."
That's exactly, and okay, good. We're on the same page. That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So that's the longhouse, and so it is. There's your intellectual pedigree if you need it, to
Yeah,
get behind the meme.
yeah,
Um, but this reaction to Peterson, though, from the left, is because he stormed the longhouse
yeah,
and
yeah.
took his shirt off and beat his chest,
That's right. That's right.
and
And he operates in no more female dominated space. I mean, there's no space more dominated in sort of in a professional way than his discipline, you know.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Unless you're talking about like HR, maybe, but
Right, right. I mean, that's the only thing that I
um,
think you're right. I think that's the only thing that would actually be more dominated than psychology. Totally.
prostitution, maybe.
Yeah, right.
I
Maybe. Yeah.
sorry, you can edit that out.
No, no, we'll leave it right in there,
Uh,
Jonathan. It's fine. It's fine.
the no the and something that Peterson would be very quick to tell you, if you were weighing in on this, is that the problem is not women.
Right. Right.
This isn't about blaming women.
Right.
It's
Right.
not about saying there are too many women in X discipline.
Right.
It's not that. It's about changes to the norms within a particular sphere that are unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
And so the piece by Thomas Edsall that Lomas cites in the essay, is really worth looking at, because it deals, I think most importantly, with conflict and the gendered nature of approaches to conflict.
Yeah.
Women compete, and they have conflict differently than men do. Men typically compete in hierarchies.
Right.
Women avoid over hierarchies and compete in less direct ways.
Yeah. Yeah, Jonathan Haidt gets into this, I think, in very constructive ways, and
Mm-hmm.
talk about the differences, and as does Peterson, but the differences between male aggression and female aggression and the way that these things are typically
Mm-hmm.
played out. I think it's very helpful and very useful for this discourse, because
Yeah.
it's very hard to have these conversations for exactly the reasons you laid out. People are like, oh, you're saying there are too many women. No, I'm not saying that at all. Right. But
Yeah.
taking seriously the different modes of being matters. It's consequential.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the whole thing, really can be encapsulated in, the difference in conflict styles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's I think it's ultimately that simple. And if you have a domain, let's say, the business world, or a particular kind of aggressive business venture,
Mm-hmm.
let's say trading,
Yeah.
um, that's something is naturally hierarchical and that thrives off of hierarchy and competition within, that hierarchy, and
Mm-hmm.
the desire to move up and, up the ladder,
Yeah.
to outperform the guy ahead of you. And if you change those norms, and if you feminize those norms,
Yeah.
so that conflict is less overt, it's much more hidden, and people are less sure of their standing within the organization, um, then that's going to have a profound impact on the performance of this business. Um, and if you make that, extend that to the university, I mean, we have. I mean, there are many reasons why the universities are dying. I think this is the biggest.
Yeah.
It's at least the life of the mind in the universities is dying,
Yeah.
or is in many cases is dead, and it's because you have this complete, have a flattening of differentiation, and in so many ways. It doesn't mean the same thing today to publish in a top journal as it meant, even 10 years ago.
Right.
And even if you publish in a top 10 journal, chances are you're still an adjunct faculty member. You're part of this blob, of expendables.
Yeah.
As I was at University of California, Irvine.
Right.
And it doesn't matter, how much you differentiate yourself. You're in this flattened cast, and there's no up. There's no upward trajectory that you can go. and and the tendency of, I think, the whole university apparatus is to move in that direction for the whole university.
Mm.
This flattening of difference, and again, this is a failure of gatekeeping, and this is barbarian capture.
Right.
But this isn't to say that there aren't pathologies related to intense masculine competition.
Yeah.
That help produce the problem as well.
Yeah, I think that sense of an overcorrection is probably pretty sound. That there has been, we're living in part of that swing of the pendulum that has been a pretty wide swing of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the overcorrection is I mean, I still marvel when people will get on a show or a podcast and start clamoring on about how we need to promote women in STEM, for instance. And it's like,
Yeah.
obviously I have no problem with a woman in STEM, and nor really a problem with promoting that, but talk about not understanding what's really going on. I mean, that
Yeah.
is not our problem right now.
Yeah.
And yet think about all of the resources that are dedicated precisely to that question. And I'm sure that there'll be people who would listen to this right now and say, oh, there's Kale, whatever, being insensitive, blah, 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 blah. But you're not paying attention to what's really going on.
Yeah. Yeah. Not at all. And very often, there's some incentive that's fueling your purblindness.
Yeah. I love that.
And it's yeah. So the question is, how do we expose and kind of incinerate those incentives?
Yeah.
But yeah. So just to return to the the Deneen controversy.
Yep.
So I can we can try to psychologize the gatekeeping from here to the end of time if we want, but at the end of the day, the fact of it remains. But the more important fact is that for someone like Deneen, with his set of beliefs, his political commitments, not the integralism stuff, but the the aristopopulism. I mean, assuming that he's still
there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The choice to publish someone like Lomez at a place like First Things, is an aristopopulist act. Very, very much so. It is, it is a way to redistribute influence and authority in a particular way. But even more so, it signals that that such redistributions of authority and renegotiations of institutional boundaries are good, and that they're necessary. So if you have a heavy stake in those boundaries, then that's something that will spook you.
Yeah.
But I think that we are in a position, though, where we need to cultivate some border phenomenology.
Yeah.
And this doesn't mean that it needs to rule, institutions. Certainly it's not going to overtake First Things.
Right.
But especially insofar as First Things has recognized the meaning, the significance of our nationalist populist turn in this country, recognizes the needs that it's trying to answer. this element of the right, the dissident right, and you could even the dirtbag left, an anonymous discourse is very much a part of that populist ferment against the decadent regime. And so, if you're intellectually serious in your commitment to overturning, the Borg,
Yeah.
you have to engage some of these voices, and you might find in the process that your own ideas are sharpened, and that you become leaven, to an area of discourse that really needs to be leavened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's really the big goal that I have, is emphasizing what's good in the discourse, condemning what's bad, and and helping the magazine, operate as a shepherd in the ways that it is, I think, uniquely situated to do.
Yeah, no, and I think that's right. I mean, that is certainly what resonated with me as soon as I saw the piece, and contra sort of to Deneen, when I saw that it was done through First Things, I was heartened because
Mm.
I'm sort of, when I'm a Gen Xer, but like I'm kind of First Things audience guy, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I'm Catholic and I go to church and I have a family and I'm raising my kids Catholic and I care about these things on that kind of just that basic level. And I like
Mhm.
to read about church politics and I like to read about culture stuff and movies. And at any rate, but I also lurk, in my real name, but I
Yeah.
lurk in these sort of circles on Twitter because I find there is a kind of vitalism to to some leaven, as you say, right,
Yeah.
to the conversation that I find really important and helping me reframe things. And so I think that First Things, what you're doing is exactly what is necessary. Again, if we're trying to reach out to, if this is a generational transfer question, how much more important is to become conversant in the kind of the memeplex that,
Mhm.
the Gen Z folks are swimming in.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And remember, just a handful of carefully produced, carefully distributed Russian memes won Trump the election. So memes are incredibly, but why wouldn't you want to harness that power?
Yeah. Yeah. It's
I,
tremendous. And no, it's
I'm
tremendous.
amazed I could keep a straight face saying that.
I know. No, well, you did a good job. No, but I mean, but we know that memes move the needle, right? I mean, this is part of I think Trump. The original Trump v. Hillary was the ultimate sort of blind side of the gatekeepers not understanding what's going
Yeah.
on. I mean, you really, so if our friends on the sort of the normie left were so upset about Trump winning that election, they have no one to blame except for themselves and their own unwillingness to, as you say, sort of indulge in border phenomenology. I mean, if they had done any kind of work outside of the sort of the normal
Mhm.
avenues of polite discourse, they would have known Trump's not a joke. Whatever it is you think about him is really not the point. But there's real, so I think that's a perfect example of what the risk you run as a sort of a normie center holding person if you're not paying attention to your borders.
Yeah. No,
Mm.
absolutely. I mean, the Trump stuff, for me was, yeah, I didn't see it coming. I didn't take him seriously.
No, I
You know,
literally I went to bed early that night. I was like,
yeah.
Hillary, it's going to be President Hillary in the morning. Literally, I went to bed early.
Oh,
I woke
I
up.
stayed up. I stayed up the whole night
Oh,
because, like, I saw it turning. I was like, "Oh my God, is this
well,
happening? Is
so
this
I'm on
happening?"
I'm on East Coast time, right? So I go to sleep. Literally, I put myself to sleep
Mm,
at like 7:30. So I went to sleep. So then I woke up at like 3 o'clock in the morning. I flip open the laptop, expecting to see, Hillary, for Hillary as the
mhm.
president. And I'm looking at this is like, wait a second, this is not happening at all. I couldn't believe it. I thought, I'm hitting refresh on the thing. So I missed it too. right? I mean,
Yeah.
I totally missed
Well,
the whole thing.
well, here's something that I keep returning to, to explain this. So my dad and my brother hated Trump
Hmm.
until he won the nomination.
Hmm. Hmm.
Or sorry, no, I mean until he won the election.
Got it. Yeah.
Really,
Yep.
my dad especially.
Yeah.
But when it became clear that Trump was going to win,
Yeah.
my brother called me, and he was just overjoyed
Mm.
as somebody who like utterly dismissed and hated Trump.
Yeah. Right.
He's not especially politically engaged. He just thinks Trump's an asshole,
Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
and um, and but his response, he's doesn't have a college education. He
Uh-huh.
does manual labor.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Um, he's a deplorable,
Yes. Yeah.
and his response was, "These people hate me,
Right. Right. Right.
and this hurts them,
Yeah.
and that's fucking awesome."
Yeah, that's right. No, I mean, and I think that continues to be the part of the reality that is ignored by the gatekeepers. I mean, they still honestly don't get that part of it. So, I know we haven't spent all this time sort of going down the Trump rabbit hole, but I mean, you sort of as this sort of new elections coming around, it's like, man, I see all this energy sort of going around DeSantis, which is fine, like whatever.
Yeah,
But I feel like that same energy is going to kind of take over again as soon as all those the true Trump fans see that the establishment is rallying around another non-Trump person. Like, I don't know, it's going to be a mess, man. I don't know. I think it's going to be a mess.
it could be. I mean, a lot of it's up to Trump.
Mm.
He is a completely self-interested, narcissistic degenerate,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
he doesn't care about the country, um, unless it serves his ego to do so.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and in many ways, we've had the good fortune of it serving his ego,
Yeah. Right. 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 Right.
in many cases. But right now, it does not.
Yeah.
And his pride is going to he will lash out and punish everyone, even though DeSantis is not the establishment guy.
Right.
He's someone who could actually come in and have a chance in hell of actually dismantling the bureaucracy.
Yeah. But
Trump will never do that because he can't staff it. You need to staff it to be able to destroy it.
right. Right. No, I think that's right. And I would just say, structurally speaking, that the same conditions exist, right?
Mhm.
The same inability for the sort of the normie center, the what is center and the border, the same blind spots to the border exist. There have been no changes. There's been no real lesson learned, as far as I
Mhm.
can tell. Again, as someone who's I'm not in the political mainstream. I'm just sort of telling you
Mhm.
what I'm seeing and watching. I think the very same conditions exist.
Yeah.
Nothing's been changed. So we
They,
are kind of at the whims of the narcissism, as you say.
they think they can put it all back in the box.
Mm, yeah. Yeah.
They think that there are technocratic solutions, to make it all go away, without returning autonomy to the demos.
Yeah. Right.
And um, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen
Yeah.
until we have a restoration of popular sovereignty.
Right. Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah. That's true. Well, all right, Justin, I got to land the plane here.
yep,
I really appreciate you coming on.
sure thing.
Folks, the links to all the articles that we talked about, books, etc., are down here below. You can find Justin. Where can the folks find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Justin Dean Lee. Dean is in James Dean. Yeah.
And of course, at First Things, where he publishes. You can find me same place. I'm on the twitter.com at Kale Zeldin, and I also write a Substack called The Underneath. Justin, thank you for bringing us to the underneath. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for
All
having
right,
me.
take care, man. All right, bye bye.